Hi. Before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Seriously, whether you're brand new to the show or you've been following for a little while, I'm truly grateful you're here. This podcast is really something I've poured a lot of heart and energy into, and the fact that you're listening it means a lot, and I appreciate every last one of you. So, if you enjoy the episode today, I'd love it if you would share it just with one person. That's all it takes. A friend, a fellow history expert, or a buff, or just someone who just is always asking questions about English history or medieval mysteries or anything of that sort. That one share can help this podcast grow a lot more than you think. And again, thank you for that. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, the History Mike, for bonus content and all that other good stuff, and some historical fun in between episodes. If you want to dig deeper, you can check out my Substack, where I post like extra notes, full-length articles, early content here and there, and a few thoughts I don't always say out loud on the mic, at least. And if you're really enjoying the show, you should really check out and want to help keep it going. Consider seeing me and finding me on Patreon. Your support helps me research and all sorts of good stuff. Keep telling the stories that matter with honesty, detail, and of course heart. All that stuff out of the way, let's get into it. Alright. Imagine this. It's a warm summer night, 1483. Two young boys, Edward V, just 12 years old, and his 9-year-old brother, Richard, Duke of York, are locked inside the Tower of London. They are the sons of the late King Edward IV, rightful heirs to the throne. But outside these walls, power is shifting. Their uncle Richard, Duke Gloucester, has taken the crown for himself. The city whispers, the rumors spread, and then silence. The boys are never seen again, and their fate remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in English history. Now, I know there's an argument going back and forth. We'll get to that later. Now, there's a few reasons why this story still captivates all of us. And you'd have to ask yourself what makes this mystery so enduring. It's been over 500 years, and people still argue about what really happened. Well, it's easy. We have theories. We have suspects, but we don't have hard proof. Disappearance of the princes is one of the greatest cold cases in royal history. And beyond just the mystery, the story shaped the entire Tudor era. If these boys had lived, Henry VII would have never become king, maybe. Would the Tudor dynasty have even happened? These are questions. So basically, in today's episode, I'm going to break down the timeline of events that really took place. So we'll take a look at each of the major suspects and try to examine the evidence that we have. I can't do everything because of the time constraints. I'll cover all the theories from Richard III to Henry VII and the possibility that the princess actually escaped. But, of course, I'll also share my take on what I believe really happened, which I'm sure others have already expressed. But by the end of this episode, I want you to really ask yourself, if you were a detective in 1483, which subject would you be looking at? And who had the most to gain? Who had the opportunity? And most importantly, what happened to the princes in the tower? So, grab a drink, sit back, let's do this. Before we get into the disappearance, the whispers, the bones in the stairwell, let's talk about how we got there. because this wasn't just a case of two boys basically vanishing. This was the fallout of a kingdom thrown into chaos. The year is 1483. England is coming off a relatively stable stretch under King Edward IV, a man who clawed his way onto the throne during the Wars of the Roses and held it, for the most part, with brute strength and political savvy. Big things that go with the throne. Big guy, fond of luxury and no stranger to the battlefield. And then, just like that, he dies. April 9th, no drawn-out illness, no slow decline. He's 40 years old and suddenly gone. Terrific. Now, his heir, Edward V, just 12. That's a child king. If you've studied English history at all, you know that child kings rarely mean smooth sailing. They mean regents, they mean protectors, power struggles, and guess what? Edward's about to get all of the above. In his will, Edward IV had named his younger brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector. Seems normal so far. That's supposed to be a safeguard, a trusted adult to steer the ship until the boy becomes of age. But Richard, allegedly he had other plans. So young Edward starts his journey from Ludlow Castle to London for his coronation. Accompanied by his maternal uncle, Lord Rivers, and his half-brother, Richard Grey, both key members of the Woodville clan, which had gained enormous influence, obviously through Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. Now, the Woodvilles weren't universally loved. In fact, a lot of the old nobility despised them, saw them as social climbers, meddling in affairs they had no business. So, Richard of Gloucester, to put it mildly, was not a fan. So, on April 30th, Richard intercepts the young king's party at Stony Stratford. And this isn't a friendly welcome at all. He arrests Lord Rivers, Richard Grey, and accuses him of treason. Terrific. And has locked them up. Later, they'll be executed without a trial. What is this? Just like that, Richard has no physical custody of the king. And remember, this is a 12-year-old boy. Just a 12-year-old boy we're talking about. He's taken to London and lodged in the Tower. What is happening? Now, let's take a pause here, because people hear the Tower of London and they immediately think prison, dungeon, execution, understandably so. But at this point, it wasn't just that. It was also a royal residence. Monarchs traditionally stayed there before the coronation. So at first, Edward's presence there really didn't raise alarm bells. But then comes the next move. Richard summons Edward's younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, to join him in the Tower. The younger boy had been staying in a sanctuary with his mother, Queen Elizabeth Woodville. Seems odd. Who had fled to Westminster Abbey the moment she realized the tide was turning. Takes pressure, political pressure, and promises of safety to convince her to give up her son. Eventually she agrees, and Richard, Duke of York, joins his brother in the Tower. So now both princes, Edward and Richard, are under the uncle's watch in a fortress he controls. Still, no coronation, no public appearance, still no answers. Meanwhile, Richard is consolidating power. Behind the scenes, he begins spreading the story that his brother, Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was illegitimate. He claims Edward had already been betrothed to another woman before marrying Elizabeth, making all their children, Edward V and Richard included, bastards. What does that mean? This is crucial. If the princes are legitimate or illegitimate, they have no claim to the throne. Parliament passes a document which is officially declares the boys unfit to rule. And when you know it, on July 6th, 1483, Richard is crowned King Richard III. The public isn't panicking at this point, not yet. The princes are assumed to be alive. Though no longer royal heirs, people reported seeing them playing at the Towers Gardens. A visitor to England, the Italian cleric Dominic Mancini, even writes that that Edward V was seen practicing his Latin and spending time in prayer, described as solemn, devout, someone who really sensed that he was in danger. I don't know how you sense that by looking, but you never know. I wasn't there. But by late summer, the boys aren't seen anymore. The windows go dark, their attendants are dismissed, no official announcements, no funerals, just silence. And in that silence, the rumors begin. Were they still alive? Had they been moved? Were they murdered? If so, by whom? Their uncle? Someone acting without his knowledge? Or someone with everything to gain if Richard III were made to look like the villain? These are questions 500 years old. And that's the story we're going to dig into today. Not just the disappearance, but the politics, the fear, the fallout, and what happened inside those tower walls. Right. So, two princes locked away in the Tower of London. They vanish, no public explanation, no bodies, just quiet. And with all that quiet came the storm. The theories, the suspects, the accusations, 5 centuries of historical finger pointing. Let's break down the big ones, because this mystery's got more suspects than a courtroom drama. Theory 1. Richard III did it. Allegedly. Let's start with the obvious one, the man who had everything to gain. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Or should I say at this point, King Richard III. Now, Richard had the boys locked up. Without a doubt, he took the crown for himself. And within weeks of becoming king, the princes were gone. The case against him, it's compelling, but there's no evidence. He had motive. 2 boys with a better claim to the throne. I mean, that's a problem if you're wearing a crown that barely fits. He had means. The tower was under his control. No one got in or out without his say-so. I mean, can't argue that. He also had the opportunity. Their attendants were dismissed. They were isolated, and then nothing. A lot of this comes from Tudor sources, obviously. Most famously, Sir Thomas More. He paints Richard as a full-blown villain, hunchback, and all, ordering the princes smothered in their sleep. That image got picked up by William Shakespeare, and boom. Evil Uncle Richard becomes legend. But just hang on a second. There are holes, right? Why didn't Richard announce their deaths and pin it on someone else? That's a question we could be looking into. Why not parade their bodies and say, see, they were plotting, I had to act. I mean, some say the boys may have been seen as late as 1484, a year into Richard's reign. So what are we left with? Circumstantial evidence. A whole lot of it. And that brings us to something historians love. Occam's razor. Easiest, it's the simplest explanation is usually the right one. And here, that's Richard. He had the crown, he had the power, and he had 2 problems. Maybe, just maybe, he made it disappear. Theory 2. Henry VII did it and then covered it up. Now, if the boys didn't die under Richard at all, what if they were still alive when Henry defeated Richard at Bosworth, 1485? That makes them a real threat, doesn't it, to Henry? A new king trying to cement his claim to the throne. Now, Henry's reign began on shaky ground to begin with, right? As we all know. His claim was weak, and the Yorkist line still had support at this point. So, if the princes were alive, they were basically a living challenge to his legitimacy. He never launched a proper investigation into their disappearance at all. Seems kind of weird. I mean, you can go either way with that. But even more suspicious, he destroyed the document that declared the princes illegitimate. Why erase it when you were trying to silence the story entirely? A little bit doesn't make sense with that. And then there's Perkin Warbeck. We all remember him. We just did an episode on him a few episodes back. A decade into Henry's reign, this young man shows up claiming to be Richard, Duke of York. He gets backing from Burgundy, France, even Scotland. Henry takes it very seriously. Eventually, he executes Warbeck, but never proves he wasn't who he claimed to be. It's pretty suspect. Either he was annoyed by the whole thing, or he just wanted to go away. So the theory goes, Henry either killed the princes to remove the threat, or they were already dead, and he used them to paint Richard III as a monster. Either way, he helped bury the truth as well. Theory 3, we're only going through a few. The Duke of Buckingham did it. This is a lesser known suspect, but frankly an interesting one. You know me, I always like to get the lesser known things. Duke of Buckingham, a man of royal blood himself. A whole lot of ambition and direct access to the tower, of course. Buckingham had been Richard's right-hand man, but suddenly turned against him. We all know the stories, right? He may have taken it upon himself to solve the problem of the princes, thinking he was doing Richard a favor. A little presumptuous, but here we are. But here's the twist with that. If Buckingham did it, and Richard didn't order it, then why didn't Richard blame him? Why didn't he shout from the rooftops, Buckingham went rogue. This guy is crazy. I am not the bad guy here. Although some suggest that Richard stayed silent because he would benefit from it. Absolutely. Others think Buckingham had his own set of plans for the throne, and he wanted all claimants out of the way. I mean, it certainly fits later on when this with beef with Henry VIII. But either way, if Buckingham had acted alone, he gambled big, and he really didn't live that long to enjoy it. He rebelled against Richard not too long after he was executed. It really makes you wonder. Others think Buckingham had his own plans for the throne and wanted all the claimants out of the way. Either way, if Buckingham acted alone, he gambled big, and he didn't live long to enjoy it. He rebelled against Richard, and not long after that, he was executed. It really makes you wonder. So, was it Richard? Cold, calculating? Henry silencing rivals after the fact? Or Buckingham going off the walls? Whoever did it, the result was the same. The two boys vanished, and England's greatest mystery was born, really. All right, we covered the suspects, but what about the evidence? What was actually left behind after the princes disappeared? There was no confession, no bodies, no coronation, just bones, rumors, and a few people who may or may not have been the boys themselves. Let's start with what was actually found in 1674, nearly 200 years after the boys vanished. Some workmen were doing renovations in the tower, cleaning out the old white tower staircase. And what did they find buried underneath it? A box containing skeletons of 2 children. The bones were found near where a 15th century staircase once stood. A little alarming. The tower authorities and Charles II himself assumed These were the bones of the lost princes. So, they were buried with royal honors in Westminster Abbey, and an urn that is still there today. It's quite the sight. I've seen it myself. Now, at first glance, this looks like the smoking gun, right? Two child skeletons hidden in a tower, exactly where people thought the boys had been murdered. Eureka, we've got it. Slow down. There was no forensic science existed in 1674. The assumption was purely based on location and timing. If we want the truth, we gotta dig deeper. Hilarious, I know. In 1933, the bones were re-examined. Conclusion? Probably two boys, probably the right age, but no way to be certain. To this day, the Church of England has refused permission for modern DNA testing. Maybe that'll change with Charles III. We don't know. But why not test the bones? Well, depending on who you ask, it's out of respect, or it's politics, or maybe it's fear. Because what if they're not the princes? Then we're back at square one. Wouldn't that be? But if it gone the other way, what if they were? It's wild. Wild and crazy stuff. Now let's talk about the ones who claimed they were the missing princes. Because in the decades that followed, more than one man had stepped forward and say, hey, remember me? I'm Prince Richard, Duke of York, and guess what, guys? I'm not dead. Now, we've covered Perkin Warbeck before, so we're just gonna do like a mild overview. Obviously, he shows up in the 1490s, claiming to be Prince Richard, the younger of the two brothers. He amazingly gains support from France, Burgundy, and even James IV of Scotland. Banana town, all over the place. He marries a Scottish noblewoman, lives as a royal guest, and not just plain dress up. Eventually leads to a rebellion against Henry VII. What? And Henry takes this very seriously. He doesn't laugh it off. He's not laughing. He launches full campaigns to track down Warbeck. Eventually, Warbeck is captured, paraded, imprisoned, and after years, executed. But here's the kicker. Henry never proves Warbeck wasn't Richard. He just shuts him up. Little odd. So who was Perkin Warbeck? Well, basically, as we covered before, a clever imposter coached by foreign enemies, or the real prince. Escaped, returned to claim his birthright? Make a movie already. And then after that, we have Lambert Simnel, the warm-up act, because earlier than Warbeck, in 1487, a boy named Lambert Simnel is crowned King Edward VI in Dublin. Claims to be Edward, Earl of Warwick, a different royal altogether, but still a threat to Henry's rule. He leads an army into England, and shockingly enough, he loses. Then he's captured. What does Henry do? He doesn't execute Simnel. Gives him a job in the royal kitchens. I'm not joking. The kid spends years turning spit roses. Why? Because Henry knew he wasn't the real deal, and he wasn't really threatened by having him around. So you've got two boys who vanish. Then you've got others who step up claiming their names, raising armies, shaking the crown, and behind it all, a silence so loud it echoes through centuries. This is crazy. So if Richard III killed them, why didn't he say so? If Henry VII knew they were dead, why not put it to rest? And if they were alive, who were they really? These aren't just mysteries, they're loaded weapons in politics of a kingdom built on fragile bloodlines. It's bananas. So the princes are gone. No announcement, no trial, no trace. But the silence doesn't stay quiet for long. Why? Thank you for asking. Because in the wake of the disappearance, England starts to crack. The aftershock echoes for decades. Immediate reactions turn to rebellion. I know. England rebellions, you've never heard of it before. But by the end of 1483, the rumors are flying. People are whispering in the taverns, marketplaces, and even at noble courts. Everyone's asking the same question. Where are Edward and Richard? No public sighting since last summer. Their tenants have all been dismissed and let go. And still, no official word from the king. It's an odd thing. There's no word from Richard. And to be honest, the silence is dangerous because England's political world runs on perception. When the king goes quiet, conspiracies fill the vacuum, fill the void. It was wild. None of it makes sense. None of it has any common sense to it. Foreign powers, France, Brittany, they all start murmuring. Inside England, loyalties begin to shift. The prince's disappearance becomes the spark for the Buckingham Rebellion, just months after Richard's coronation. Now, we spoke of this guy's son a while ago. Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham, once Richard's staunchest ally, turns on him, raises a rebellion, supposedly to put Edward V back on the throne, which is odd, because by then everyone suspects Edward V is dead. This is pure lunacy at this point. Are you keeping up with all this? So basically, into this chaos steps Henry Tudor, exiled, penniless, with the thinnest royal claim imaginable. But in a world where the princes are gone, even a Tudor starts to look like a good solution. Henry gathers support from the disillusioned Yorkists and Lancastrian loyalists alike, which is crazy to think about it, being what they've just been through. So in 1485, he crosses from France and meets Richard III at the battlefield of Bosworth. Richard dies. Henry becomes Henry VII. But here's the irony of it. Henry's rule depends entirely on the princes being gone. If they're still alive, he's got no crown. It goes back and forth all day. Henry VII and the mystery that really served him. It really did. So what does Henry do? He doesn't investigate the prince's disappearance. He doesn't launch an inquiry. He just lets the mystery stand. He marries Elizabeth of York, uniting the feuding houses, we all know that, destroying the documents, removing the record that declared the princes illegitimate. Why would you do something like that? What an odd thing to do. He executes Perkin Warbeck years later, but never proves he was a fake. We all assume it because it just sounds ridiculous. It's almost as if keeping the story vague suited him. Richard stays the villain, the boys remain in the shadows, and Henry gets all the play as the unifier. Speculation, all of it. It's basically the mystery that wouldn't die. Even after Henry's reign, the mystery lingers. Historians debate it. Shakespeare dramatizes it. Pretenders keep popping up. And no monarch, Tudor or otherwise, has ever really clears it up. You got bones found in a tower in 1674, raise more questions than answers. DNA testing is still off the table, but you never know with the new royals in the house. Every new theory just adds fuel to the fire, I think. In the end, the disappearance of the princes didn't just destabilize the kingdom. It really reshaped the monarchy itself. It basically handed Henry VII the crown. It gave birth to the Tudor dynasty, and it left us with the greatest cult case in English royal history. So where does that leave us? 2 young princes locked in a tower by their uncle, sudden silence, a crown that changes hands, 5 centuries of speculation. I mean, let's be honest. If we had CCTV footage from the tower in 1483, this would have been solved in about 5 minutes. But we don't. What we have instead are theories, timeline, bias, and a lot of people with something to hide. So here's the question, right? Who did it? Let's weigh it all. Why not? Did Richard III do it? He had the means, the motive, and the moment. Without a doubt, the boys were in his care, and they vanished on his watch. It's pretty damning. But here's the thing. He never confessed, never staged a cover story, never tried to explain, which in some ways is more chilling than any confession, really, if you think about it. And there's Henry. If the boys were alive when he took the throne, he had every reason to really eliminate them. Or maybe they were already dead. Or he just made sure no one ever got close to the truth. And at Buckingham, I mean, the rogue operator maybe? I don't know. But would Richard have let that happen under his nose and said nothing about it? I don't know. It all comes back to the same question. Who benefited the most? Who held the keys? Who walked away with the crown? I think Occam's razor cuts straight through the noise. The simplest explanation? Richard III did it. He had the power and the princes. And the princess never came out. That's just my opinion. We all have our different opinions about it. We can talk about it in the comments later on. But can this mystery ever be solved? Could we find the answers today? Maybe. We've got the bones of Westminster Abbey. Modern DNA testing could compare them with known Plantagenet descendants. But the church says no. Maybe Charles will change that, unless something's happened since I've researched this. Until that changes, or unless someone uncovers a dusty scroll in a forgotten archive somewhere, we're stuck with this amazing mystery. And maybe that's what keeps it all alive, right? Because let's face it, there's something about this story. The innocence of the boys, the cold stone walls of the tower, and the ambition that swallowed a kingdom. I mean, you can't write this stuff. So what do you think? Was Richard the cold-blooded killer history painted to be? Did Henry VII erase the truth for his own gain? Or is there a third option we've all missed? I'm more than happy to hear it, but I want to hear your thoughts. Message me on Instagram or TikTok, or drop a comment, or shoot an email or DM. I want to keep the debate alive because I know there's good stories out there and good opinions. Let's keep the debate alive because this story is not over. Not really. So again, I just want to say thank you for listening. Please share this with somebody that likes history. Until next time, keep your sword sharp and your history sharper.